My family always thought of me as a mistake. On their anniversary, I showed everyone what happens when a mistake finally responds. I'm shaking a little just typing this, so forgive me if this comes out messy. My name's Lena, 31, female, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the wrong kind of daughter in my own family. My parents, Robert, 63, and Marianne, 60, had a favorite from the start. My brother, Evan, 33. He was their golden boy, varsity athlete, now a finance guy with a perfect smile and a LinkedIn page full of buzzwords. I was the odd one. Paint-stained fingers, messy notebooks, a brain wired toward shapes and emotion, instead of spreadsheets and stats. When I was little, my dad used to joke that I must have come home with the wrong family at the hospital. I'd laugh because everyone else did. What else could I do at 8 years old? But then it kept happening. Every birthday, every dinner, every time I said or did something that didn't fit their version of normal. Maybe we should get a DNA test, huh, Robert? Mom would say, smirking. See where the artist gene came from. Definitely not from us. They'd laugh. Evan would laugh, and I'd smile like it didn't hurt. By high school, I'd stopped trying to keep up with Evan. He was captain of the soccer team, homecoming king, straight A's. My art teacher once pulled my mom aside to tell her I had real potential, that I should apply for a summer program in Chicago. Mom smiled politely, then told her, "We don't believe in encouraging hobbies over real goals." I didn't go. The older I got, the sharper their comments became. Family friends would ask how my art was going, and Dad would say, "Still waiting for her big break. Until then, we keep her around for comic relief." Everyone would laugh, glasses clinking. I learned to laugh too, but something inside me chipped each time. When I got into the Rhode Island School of Design, my mom said, "That's sweet, honey, but we can't justify spending real tuition money on finger painting." They paid for Evan's MBA without blinking. I took out loans and scrubbed tables at a diner between classes. And even after all that, after I built something for myself, they still treated it like a phase. I became a sculptor. My work's been in galleries, magazines. Last year, I even won a national prize, one that made local news. They came to the ceremony, sat stiffly in the second row, and afterward, Mom told me my dress made me look tired. They still tell those old maybe she's adopted jokes at parties, at my shows. I've learned to smile through clenched teeth, pretending their cruelty doesn't stick to my ribs like rust. But something changed this year. They're celebrating their 35th anniversary in a few months. Evan's planning the big party, some grand event full of champagne and self-congratulation, and he asked me to make a sculpture as the centerpiece. Something that represents the strength of family, he said.
Hello, everyone. Today is my birthday, so I'd really appreciate your subscription and a like. Enjoy watching.
And that's when the idea hit me. Not just to make a sculpture, but to make a statement, because if they've spent my whole life joking about me being the outsider, maybe it's time I gave them something to really wonder about. I started sketching for their anniversary piece the night Evan called, some vague, abstract family unity theme. I hung up and just stared at my notebook for a while, the word family sitting there like a bruise. Every line I drew felt like a lie. Evan, ever the dutiful son, kept me updated on every party detail through our family group text. He meant well, I think, but he's the kind of person who doesn't see the rot unless it's painted red and flashing. Mom and Dad are so excited, he'd text. They're really proud of how far we've all come. Proud. That word always hit wrong. My parents lived in this big, colonial-style house in Hartford. Every room looked like a magazine spread, staged, polished, soulless. It's the same house where I spent my teenage years hiding in the attic with a sketch pad while Mom and Dad threw dinner parties downstairs. I'd listen to them brag about Evan's soccer scholarships while pretending not to exist. That attic became the only place I could breathe. Now, years later, I was supposed to make a sculpture celebrating them. Evan kept pushing. "It'll mean a lot to them if you're involved. You know how Mom gets sentimental?" I almost laughed out loud at that. Mom doesn't get sentimental, she gets performative. Everything she feels has an audience. When I finally agreed, I told them I'd make something warm, from the heart. They smiled, clueless. Dad even joked, "Just don't make us look too ugly, kiddo." So I started creating. The piece was massive, welded steel and glass, shaped like an intertwined trio of figures, abstract enough to seem symbolic but deliberate enough that anyone really looking could read the truth in it. The first figure stood slightly apart, hands reaching but never touching the others. The metal I used for that one was rough, scarred, a little bent, but solid. That was me. The other two, gleaming and smooth, merged into each other so tightly they were almost indistinguishable. Them. But that sculpture was only half the plan. Because while I was building it, another idea had started to take shape. One that scared me a little with how right it felt. For years they'd joked I wasn't their real daughter. They'd made it my identity, the family's running gag. So what if I turned the joke inside out? I started collecting old photos, family documents, anything I could get my hands on. My Aunt Claire, Mom's estranged sister, helped. She'd always been my quiet ally, the only one who ever whispered, "You didn't deserve how they treated you." She mailed me a box of old papers from my grandparents' attic, and that box gave me everything I needed to spin my web. Using a mix of those documents, some careful photo editing, and a fake ancestry report I commissioned online, I created evidence. just believable enough to pass at a glance. A paternity report. A birth certificate with a different hospital name. A letter supposedly written by my mother to her sister, hinting at an accident and a secret. All of it neatly sealed in an envelope. I didn't plan to confront them quietly. No, this needed witnesses. The same kind of crowd that used to laugh when Dad made his jokes. Friends, coworkers, neighbors. People who saw my parents as this charming, polished couple. They wanted a spectacle for their anniversary. I was going to give them one. Still, I wasn't immune to doubt. Late one night, after hours of shaping metal and pretending I was fine, I called Claire. "You're sure you want to do this?" she asked gently. "They've humiliated me my whole life," I said. "They think it's funny. Maybe it's time they know what it feels like to be the punchline." She didn't try to talk me out of it, just said, "Then make it count." And I will. The sculpture's almost done. Evan says the party's going to be elegant but intimate. Perfect. Because when those lights hit the sculpture and everyone's eyes turn toward it, I'll be standing right there, envelope in hand, ready to tell the story they've been laughing about for 31 years. Only this time, I'll be the one holding the script. The week of the anniversary, everything started to feel unreal, like I was floating through someone else's life. Evan called every day with updates, the catering, the floral arrangements, the slideshow he was putting together. He was so proud of himself for pulling off something truly special for Mom and Dad. He kept saying that. They deserve it. Every time he said those words, I had to mute the phone to stop myself from laughing or screaming. When I dropped by their house to measure the display area for the sculpture, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. In the hallway, there were new family portraits, huge glossy ones, of my parents with Evan, his wife Marissa, and their 2 kids. Perfect smiling faces in perfect golden light. I wasn't in a single photo, not one. Mom saw me staring and said, "Oh, those were just from a shoot we did last fall. You were busy, remember?" I wasn't. She just hadn't told me. That night, I went home to my studio and worked until my hands ached. Every strike of the hammer, every weld of steel felt like a word I'd never been allowed to say. You forgot me. You erased me. You laughed when I cried. You made me a ghost in my own family. The final version of the sculpture stood nearly 6 feet tall, 3 intertwined figures, frozen mid-reach. Under the gallery lights, the 2 polished figures shimmered like armor. The third, my figure, caught the light differently. The surface was raw, jagged in places, like it had survived a fire. When I finished it, I stared at it for a long time and whispered, "You're free now." Claire came by the day before the party, bringing a bottle of wine and that steady, grounding presence only she could give. She looked at the sculpture and smiled, sad, proud. "You really did it," she said. "It's beautiful." "It's the only truth they'll ever hear from me," I said quietly. Claire nodded, then hesitated. "You're sure about the papers?" "Completely. I had rehearsed every detail." The envelope was sealed and labeled for Robert and Marianne. Inside were the fabricated records, birth certificate, DNA test, the supposed letter between my mother and her sister. Each page carefully aged, printed on textured paper that looked like it had been sitting in a drawer for decades. I even sprayed a faint scent of old books on it. It was art, really, emotional art. My therapist would probably call it performative catharsis. I just called it justice. The morning of the party, I woke up before sunrise. My studio floor was littered with shards of glass from my final test cuts. I didn't clean them up. Somehow it felt fitting to leave them, little remnants of what this had cost me. I dressed simply, black jumpsuit, hair tied back, no flash, no color, just presence. When I arrived at the event hall that evening, Evan was already buzzing around with a clipboard, checking details. "Lena, oh my god, it looks amazing," he said, seeing the sculpture for the first time. "They're gonna love it." I smiled, but inside, something dark curled tighter. "Yeah," I said softly. "I think they will." Guests started pouring in. Old neighbors, my dad's golf buddies, my mom's colleagues from her charity board. The room smelled like champagne and money and self-satisfaction. When my parents walked in hand, the crowd clapped like they were royalty. Dad gave a little wave. Mom did that practiced, gracious smile she'd perfected years ago. They looked exactly how they wanted the world to see them. Successful, adored, untouchable. I waited. Patient, calm. The sculpture stood in the center under a spotlight, gleaming like truth, waiting to happen. When the speeches began, Evan's heartfelt toast, the slideshow of family photos I wasn't in, I felt my pulse slow. My moment was coming. I reached into my bag, fingers brushing the envelope. 31 years of being their living punchline. 31 years of pretending the laughter didn't sting. It was time to hand them a mirror. And watch what cracked first, their perfect image or the lie they'd built around me. When Evan finished his speech, everyone clinked glasses and turned toward my parents. My mother dabbed fake tears with a napkin, while Dad grinned like a politician. The room glowed with soft jazz and polite laughter. Exactly the kind of scene they'd always wanted to live inside. That's when I stood up. I didn't plan some grand announcement, no microphone or spotlight. I just stepped forward, envelope in hand, and said, loud enough for the tables around me to quiet, "Before we move on, I'd like to say a few words too." Evan smiled instantly, relieved. "Of course, Lena. Everyone, this is my sister. She made the beautiful sculpture you see behind us. Applause, cameras lifted. My heart didn't race. It slowed, like everything inside me had finally synced with purpose. Thanks, Evan, I said, turning to face the crowd. Mom, Dad, this piece was inspired by our family. You always told me to express myself honestly through my art, so I did. People chuckled lightly. My parents beamed, oblivious. I gestured to the sculpture. It's called Inheritance. A murmur went through the crowd. I heard my mom whisper to Dad, "Oh, how sweet." 3 figures, I continued. 2 joined, 1 left apart. It's about belonging. Or what it feels like when you never really do. The room fell still. I saw Mom's smile falter. Dad's hand dropped from her shoulder. You used to joke that maybe I wasn't really yours, I said, voice steady. That maybe the hospital mixed me up with someone else. It was funny to everyone. Family, friends, even coworkers. Every dinner, every party, someone brought it up. I laughed too. Because what else was I supposed to do? But those jokes, they never really stopped. Whispers rippled through the tables now. Evan looked frozen, eyes darting between me and our parents. I took a breath and held up the envelope. So I decided to find out the truth. Mom's face went white. Dad shifted in his seat. Lena, he said sharply, this isn't the time. No, I said, cutting him off. This is exactly the time. Because all my life you've made a joke out of me. Out of the idea that I didn't belong. So tonight, on your special night, I thought I'd return the favor. I walked to their table and placed the envelope in front of them. I found things, I said quietly. Letters, records, a DNA test. Things that explain a lot. For a few seconds, no one breathed. I could hear the faint clinking of champagne glasses, somewhere near the back. Mom stared at the envelope like it might bite her. Dad finally grabbed it, jaw tight, trying to keep his face composed for the guests. He tore it open. And I watched the blood drain from his cheeks as he saw the forged documents. A paternity report showing no biological relation, a letter addressed to Dear Claire written in my mother's handwriting, talking about the accident and switching the babies before anyone noticed. The crowd gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Cameras started flashing. Mom stood abruptly, hand trembling. This is absurd. Lena, what have you... I cut her off again. It's okay, Mom. You don't have to explain. I finally understand why I never fit in. Why the jokes always hit too close to home. I guess the truth hurts more when everyone hears it, doesn't it? Evan stood up, eyes wide, whispering, Lena, what the hell is this? But I didn't answer him. I just stepped back and let silence swallow the room. For a long, unbearable moment, it was like the whole party was suspended in shock. And then everything shattered. Mom started crying, full body shaking. Dad grabbed her arm and hissed something through his teeth, trying to drag her toward the exit. Guests murmured, whispering, backing away. The family's perfect mask, 35 years of polish, was collapsing right there under the soft glow of fairy lights. I didn't move. I just stood beside my sculpture as they stormed out, the crowd's whispers following them like smoke. Evan turned toward me, his face a mix of disbelief and horror. Lena, tell me that wasn't real. I looked at him, my golden brother, always so sure of our perfect family, and said quietly but clearly, does it matter? Then I picked up my bag, walked out into the cool night air, and for the first time in my life felt seen. The morning after the party, my phone blew up like a crime scene. Missed calls, texts, tagged posts. Half the guests had uploaded videos before dessert had even been cleared. Someone filmed my speech from the front row. It was already bouncing around Facebook and TikTok, titled things like, Artist exposes family secret during parents' anniversary party. By sunrise, the video had thousands of views. By noon, tens of thousands. And I hadn't even gotten out of bed. When I finally did, I saw a message from Evan. You need to fix this. Mom hasn't stopped crying. Dad's threatening to sue you. What were you thinking? I stared at it for a while, before replying. I was thinking about 31 years of humiliation. Guess that counts for something. He didn't respond. Around midday, I got another message, this time from Claire. They're in full meltdown mode, but Lena, people are talking. You may have started something bigger than you meant to. Bigger was an understatement. By evening, a local news outlet had picked up the story. They blurred my parents' faces, but used footage of the sculpture and quoted my words. An artist's emotional revelation about family identity shocks guests at Hartford Gala. They didn't mention it was fake, obviously. Only I and Claire knew that. My parents issued a statement through Evan, something stiff and polished. Our family is devastated by the false accusations made at our private celebration. We are seeking legal counsel and ask for privacy. But the damage was done. Their perfect image, the respected couple, the generous donors, the warm family, was gone. Overnight, the whispers turned into speculation. People wondered who the real daughter was if there'd been a scandal, an affair. It was everything they'd ever feared most, being seen as imperfect. Still, I couldn't pretend the backlash didn't hit me too. My professional Instagram was a war zone. Some people called it a performance masterpiece, an act of radical truth through art. Others said I was mentally unstable, vindictive, cruel. Galleries reached out, some curious, others canceling shows, until the dust settles. My chest felt hollow. I'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. That night, I went to Claire's house. She poured wine, no questions asked. We sat in her kitchen, surrounded by old postcards and her cat winding between our legs. You knew it would be bad, she said softly. But I don't think you knew how bad. I shook my head. I wanted them to feel it. All the shame they handed me, wrapped in a joke. I just didn't expect it to explode like this, Claire sighed. They built their whole lives on pretending. You just tore the curtain down. I stayed silent, staring into my glass, thinking about Mom's face. That flash of confusion and fear when she saw the envelope. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was something darker and sadder, like guilt wearing Victory's clothes. But then the messages started again, not from family, not from strangers, from artists. People telling me they'd seen the video, that they'd grown up the same way, the wrong child, the overlooked one. A sculptor in Portland, a painter in Chicago, a photographer in London. They said the piece made them cry, that someone finally put their pain into form. And for the first time, something inside me eased. Maybe I hadn't just burned something down. Maybe I'd lit something too. Still, the cost was steep. My parents went completely silent. No calls, no emails. Evan tried once more, his voice tight with frustration when I answered. Do you even realize what you've done? They're humiliated, Lena. They're talking about disowning you legally. They already disowned me emotionally years ago, I said. This was just paperwork. He hung up. That night, I opened my laptop and uploaded the photo of the sculpture, the same one from the party, to my professional page. Caption, Inheritance 2025, for anyone who's ever been told they don't belong. It went viral again. Thousands of comments, thousands of people sharing their own stories. For a moment, just a moment ago, I felt something like peace. Until the next morning when I woke up to find a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was shaky, brittle. You think you know pain, Lena? You have no idea what you've done to this family. You've ruined everything. I hope it was worth it. And maybe it was, but I couldn't help thinking the truth I'd created was still a lie. And lies, even the right kind, always come due. 2 weeks passed before I saw them again. I was working late in my studio, the radio humming low, when headlights washed through the window. I knew that car immediately, Dad's black Lexus, the one he'd once bragged about, buying in cash, like a real man. My stomach tightened. He got out first, still in his pressed shirt, still carrying that same forced authority, like a cologne he didn't know had expired. Mom followed, sunglasses on, even though it was almost 9 at night. They didn't knock. They just walked in. Lena, Dad said, his voice too calm. We need to talk. I leaned against my workbench, trying to keep my hands from shaking. You could have called. He ignored that. You humiliated us, publicly. You made us into a circus act. You did that yourselves, I said quietly. I just held up the mirror. Mom's voice cracked. Do you have any idea what you've done to our reputation? People won't even look at me at the country club anymore. You've destroyed what? I cut in. The image? The one where you're the perfect parents and I'm your charity case joke? Her face twisted. Don't turn this into some martyr story. You lied, Lena. You forged documents. You've always been dramatic, but this was psychotic. There it was. That word again. Dramatic. The same word she'd used every time I cried as a kid, every time I asked why Evan got praised while I got mocked. Dad stepped closer, his voice sharp. You're going to issue a statement retracting it all. Say it was performance art. That you didn't mean for people to believe it. I let out a bitter laugh. It was performance art. He slammed his hand on the table hard enough that the tools rattled. You know damn well what I mean. You tell them it was fiction. Now, I met his eyes. It's not about fiction or fact anymore. It's about truth. You made me an outsider, Dad. You and Mom turned me into the family punchline. I just turned your words back on you. For a second, the room went completely still. Then Mom's voice dropped low, quiet, almost shaking. You've always resented us, she said. You think we're monsters, but do you ever stop to wonder why? Why we pulled away? Why it was easier to joke than to get close to you? Something in her tone stopped me cold. Dad's face softened slightly. Not guilt exactly, but fatigue. You were different, he said. You were sensitive, emotional. Marianne didn't know how to handle that. Neither did I. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from him. But before I could respond, Mom broke down completely. Not delicate crying, but a sudden, guttural sob. You think we didn't love you? You think it was easy watching you shut yourself off, bury yourself in that attic, talking to no one? You made us feel like strangers in our own home, Lena. Her voice echoed against the concrete walls. And for the first time in years, I saw her. Not the cold perfectionist, but a woman terrified of being exposed. The silence that followed was unbearable. Finally, I said, if you loved me, you should have shown it. Instead, you laughed at me. She wiped her face with trembling hands. We thought joking made it lighter. We didn't know it broke you. Dad's shoulders sagged. We just wanted you to be tougher. The world isn't kind to people who feel too much. Yeah, I whispered. I know. They stood there for a long time, unsure what to say next. Then Dad exhaled. We'll start therapy, family therapy. But this? He gestured toward the viral chaos outside our lives. This ends now. Take down the posts, stop feeding the fire. I'll think about it, I said. They left quietly. No shouting this time, no slammed doors. Just two people who finally looked human to me, broken, frightened, but real. When they drove off, I sank to the floor beside the sculpture, tracing the jagged edges of the rough figure, my figure, with my fingertips. I'd always imagined this moment as victory. But sitting there in the silence, surrounded by the echo of my parents' pain and my own, it didn't feel like winning. It felt like aftermath. A week later, Evan texted again. Mom started therapy. She wants you there. Dad, too. They're trying, Lena. Maybe it's something. And for the first time, I didn't roll my eyes. I didn't scoff. I just stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Okay, I'll come. Because maybe this wasn't about revenge anymore. Maybe it was about what comes after you've burned everything down, standing in the ashes, figuring out if anything worth saving is still there. The first therapy session was awkward, doesn't even cover it. Evan came too, of course, because he couldn't stand not being the referee. He sat stiffly between our parents on the couch while I took the armchair across from them. The therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Patel, started with, "Let's focus on how each of you experienced this family dynamic." It was like lighting a fuse. Dad jumped right in. "I just don't understand why Lena had to make it public. We could have talked privately." Dr. Patel cut him off gently. "Robert, I'll get to that. But right now, let's talk about before the party, the years before." That word, years, hung in the air. Mom's eyes went glassy, her voice small. "We made jokes. We thought it was harmless. I never meant to hurt her." I finally looked up. "You told people I might not even be your child. For years. Do you really think that was harmless?" Evan shifted uncomfortably. "Come on, Lena. You know they didn't mean it." I laughed, but it came out brittle. "Yeah, that's what everyone says about cruelty. They didn't mean it." Dr. Patel didn't interrupt. She just let the silence drag, and in that quiet, something cracked open. Mom started crying again, but this time it wasn't the performative kind. It was raw, like she'd finally realized the jokes had cost her something real. "I didn't know how to talk to you," she said through tears. "You were intense. You felt everything so deeply. I grew up in a family where emotions were weaknesses. Joking was how we survived." "And you made me the punchline," I said quietly. Dad's voice broke for the first time. "We were proud of you, Lena. We just didn't understand you. You were different from the world we knew." I wanted to scream that different didn't mean wrong, but the words caught in my throat, because for the first time, I believed him. I saw it, how small their world really was, how much of their cruelty came from fear. Dr. Patel guided us through weeks of that, dissecting the years like old bones. Some days were explosive, others eerily calm. Mom apologized, halting and clumsy. Dad started asking questions instead of barking orders. Evan, to his credit, finally admitted that he'd seen the favoritism all along and did nothing. Little by little, the tension started to uncoil. I still kept my distance, but I began to show up. I stopped ignoring calls. I even visited the house once, though the family portraits in the hallway still didn't include me. The irony didn't sting like it used to. I was just numb. The internet chaos eventually died down. People moved on to the next viral scandal. My career, surprisingly, rebounded stronger than before. A gallery in New York reached out, calling Inheritance one of the most emotionally charged installations of the decade. They offered a full exhibit under the theme Truth and Fabrication. I said yes. The week before the show, I sent Mom and Dad invitations. I didn't expect them to come, but they did. They stood quietly at the opening, watching strangers marvel at the sculpture that had nearly destroyed us. Mom wore a simple dress, no pearls, no performance. Dad kept his arm around her, like he was afraid she might disappear. When the crowd thinned, she came up to me, eyes soft. "It's beautiful," she said. "Painful, but beautiful. You always saw things we couldn't." Her voice cracked on that last word. For once, I didn't feel the urge to correct her, to rub salt in the wound. I just nodded. "Thank you." Then she surprised me. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, handwritten, sealed. "For you," she said, "something I found when we were cleaning out old boxes. I think it belongs to you." That night after the exhibit, I opened it at home. Inside was an old Polaroid, me, maybe 6 years old, standing in the attic with clay all over my hands. Mom was kneeling beside me, smiling, really smiling, not posing. On the back, in her handwriting, it said, "Lena's first masterpiece." I sat there for a long time, staring at it, that little girl and her mother, frozen in a rare, real moment of affection. I hadn't even remembered it existed. For the first time in months, maybe years, I cried, not out of anger or grief, but something softer. I realized then that I didn't need them to understand me completely. I just needed them to stop pretending. Maybe that's all healing ever is, not perfection, just honesty. And somewhere deep inside, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something real. The months after the New York exhibit felt strangely still, like the silence after a long, deafening storm. The chaos had finally burned itself out. The gossip blogs stopped mentioning my name, and people at galleries began treating me like an artist again, not a scandal. My parents kept going to therapy with Dr. Patel, even when I wasn't there. Evan sent me updates sometimes, simple, almost tender ones. Dad actually apologized for missing my first art fair. Mom's reading that book on emotional intelligence. She says it reminds her of you. I didn't know what to do with that. Gratitude, pity, relief? Maybe all three. For the first time in my adult life, I stopped feeling like a ghost orbiting someone else's story. I moved into a bigger studio on the outskirts of town, somewhere quiet and sunlit. Claire helped me move in, still my constant, still my compass. She brought a small potted olive tree and said, "You need something that keeps growing no matter what's happened." I laughed, but I kept it by the window anyway. Evan visited a few weeks later. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the new space, his shoes dusty from the drive. "You know," he said, "they really are trying. Mom even invited me to one of their sessions. She wants you to come back." I turned from the work table, hands streaked with clay. "I know. I just don't know if I'm ready." He nodded. "That's fair. I just wanted you to know you changed things. For real this time." When he left, I sat in the quiet again. The hum of the kiln soft in the background, and realized he was right. Things had changed, but not in the way I'd imagined when I first started all this. The revenge, the spectacle, the exposure. It had all been about forcing them to feel the pain they'd given me. But what I hadn't understood then was that revenge doesn't erase pain. It just shares it around until everyone's bleeding. And yet, through all that ruin, something had been rebuilt. Something smaller, humbler, more honest. My parents weren't the people I'd always wanted, but they were trying. For the first time, that counted for something. One weekend, a few months later, I drove back to Hartford. Not for a party or an apology, just for coffee. Mom opened the door, surprised but smiling. No jokes, no coldness. Just, "You look tired, sweetheart. Come in." We sat in the kitchen, same marble counters, same smell of lemon polish, and talked like people, not caricatures of each other. She told me about the garden she was planting. Dad came in halfway through, wearing the same golf sweater he'd had for years. He looked older, quieter. He said, "Your mom's been bragging about your show. I saw the photos. You made us proud." The words landed differently this time. Not perfect, but enough. We didn't talk about the envelope or the lies or the chaos that had followed. Maybe we never would. But for once, that felt okay. After that, I started coming around more often. Just short visits, small talks, no big expectations. I even helped Dad fix the old attic window one afternoon. The sunlight poured in through the cracked glass, hitting the same spot where I'd once sculpted in secret as a kid. "I used to hide up here," I said. He nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "We noticed. We just didn't know how to reach you." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it didn't need to be. Some words mean more unsaid. That night, back in my apartment, I looked at the Polaroid Mom had given me. I framed it, put it on my studio wall, right beside the photograph of inheritance. Two pieces of my life, side by side, the broken and the becoming. Because that's who I was now, not the outsider, not the victim, not even the vengeful artist, but a whole person, made of contradictions. My parents might never fully understand me, and maybe that's okay. I have Claire, who always saw me clearly. Evan, who finally learned how to stand beside me. Friends who feel more like family than DNA ever did. And in the quiet hum of my studio, surrounded by steel, clay, and sunlight, I finally found something I'd been chasing my entire life. Not their approval, not their validation, but peace.